Notable injury news for the Hoosiers on Wednesday as it was announced Jakai Newton underwent a procedure, leaving an already thin IU backcourt in a potentially dire situation.
You are Locked On Hoosiers, your daily podcast on the Indiana Hoosiers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Thursday. Sorry, I lost track of the days there, everybody. You are Locked On Hoosiers, your one and only daily IU podcast, part of the Locked On Network, your team every day. Thank you for tuning in wherever it may be from today and making us your first listen. I'm your host, Jacob Rude. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. FanDuel.com/locked on. Right before the show went live, I had a different plan for today's episode, but it was announced that Jakai Newton underwent a procedure that leaves us the Hoosiers in a bit of a sketchy situation, to be honest. So IU announced in a typically vague manner, as they tend to do with injuries. Here is the full announcement, the full release. Indiana freshman guard Jakai Newton underwent a procedure to treat a pre-existing injury today. There is no timetable for his return at this point. So we don't know what the procedure is, we don't know what the injury is, and we don't know a timetable. But other than that, a lot of clarity in that release. We kind of have to make some assumptions based on the little info they have. I would assume, and this one I feel pretty confident in, it has to do with his knee injury that kept him out in high school. So that was an injury he initially suffered in April of 2022. He tried to play a little bit, but realistically did not play through the summer, through the fall, and looked set to return in January of 2023. He tweaked it again in December of 2022, and even by his own admission, should have just sat out the whole season. He sat out about 6 weeks, rushed back to try to play the last 2 weeks of his senior season, which you can't really fault him for wanting to play some of his senior season. But the result was that he hasn't really been doing anything when team-wise when it comes to practice and things like that this summer. It's not a surprise that he had this procedure. He hasn't been doing a lot of on-court work, and none of the updates have indicated that he was close to doing that, and we see why now. But this isn't great news for Indiana. Realistically, I was never really factoring him into the equation when thinking about IU's guard depth, not because I knew anything, but just because he had microfracture surgery. That's a very serious surgery that even as recently as 10, 12 years ago was kind of career threatening. And obviously medicine has advanced, things have advanced. That doesn't mean the surgery isn't any less impactful. So that was a major surgery he had. There was just so much uncertainty about when he would be back, what he would look like when he returned, that I kind of had just not really considered him. But now officially, I would be surprised if he's at least at the start of the season ready to return. Again, we don't know what the procedure was, anything like that. If he is out for any length of time, Indiana's backcourt is dangerously thin. You do have Xavier Johnson. You do have Trey Galloway. You have backups for both those positions, but one of them is a freshman in Gabe Cups. One of them is CJ Gunn, who struggled as a freshman. So you're anticipating or needing him to make a leap in his sophomore season, which I don't think is unrealistic, but at the same time, again, he struggled last season. And so you have those four guys. You have Anthony Leal in the mix as well, though his playing time has been virtually non-existent, save for random spot minutes or when half the team is suspended against Northwestern. Outside of that, that is it for scholarship guards for Indiana. You might have some walk-ons. You might have some guys that could play out of position, but you don't really have much else when it comes to guards. And that leaves the Hoosiers in a bit of an awkward spot. They have an open roster spot, an open scholarship spot, I should say. There isn't really anyone to use it on. And that's been the problem since kind of the transfer season wrapped up, is that Indiana hasn't really found someone to use this roster spot on. So barring kind of some type of last second change and a dramatic shift, Indiana's probably not going to use that scholarship spot, but also are going to only have 5 scholarship guards on the roster. It's not great. It certainly is not a great situation. There is the possibility that they add somebody. If you're in the transfer portal in mid-August and you haven't found somewhere yet, there's a reason, to be frank. So I don't know that that's going to work. Maybe you can find someone internationally, but you have to deal a lot with making sure they're eligible as well. I don't imagine that anybody's going to be added to this roster. So realistically, IU's going to have 5 guards. Could they play somebody out of position? Maybe. I don't know who. It's not like they really have guys who can shift over and be more of a guard, I guess. I mean, Caleb Banks isn't really capable of doing it. Mackenzie and Mgbako, no, not really, unless it's just kind of a no. I think he's closer to a 4 than he has a shooting guard. Same with Anthony Walker, same there. So there just isn't really a solution to this problem right now, not one that we can see. And it's just going to leave Indiana in a bind this season when it comes to backcourt depth. We'll stay updated. There is the possibility that this injury isn't long-term and maybe it fixes some issues and maybe he's able to play this season, but out indefinitely is typically not a great thing to hear when discussing a surgery or a procedure, anything like that. I don't know when or if we'll get clarity on what the procedure was, what the injury even was. Again, we're assuming it's his knee. They didn't even say that. And maybe at some point we'll get an update on the timetable. I don't imagine any of those things are happening. So for now, we just kind of have to roll with what we have. IU's going to have 5 guards next season and hope for the best. And that's about as good as it's going to get for the Hoosiers with those guards. Kind of on that note, the original plan for today's episode was to talk about some lineups we're excited to see. I still want to do that. So let's talk about 3 lineups that I am excited to see the Hoosiers put out on the floor this season. We'll start with the one I'm most excited to see here in a moment. Let's talk about today's sponsor first, though, FanDuel. We've read a lot of kind of promotions for FanDuel on this podcast before. To me, this one feels like no doubt the best one. So football season is about to kick off, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You don't even have to get the bet right that they win the Super Bowl. But if you bet on the Chiefs, for example, when they go and win 13, 14 games, however it may be this year, every time they win, you're going to win as well. You can use those bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. You guys know how much we love them there, and this feels like the best deal they've offered yet. Big thanks to you guys for making us your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. We're going to do the women's basketball version of this, looking at some notable lineups that we're excited to see. But let's start with the men's side. And the lineup I want to see the most is quite simply the starting lineup. I think this is such a change in how Indiana has typically played that I'm fascinated to see what it ends up looking like. The Hoosiers are I assume, going to trot out Xavier Johnson, Trey Galloway, Mackenzie Mgbako, Malik Renew, and Kel'el Ware. There's so many questions I have about that lineup. How does Xavier Johnson look on his return? Realistically, he missed the better part of, I guess maybe not the whole year, but from early December on, he hasn't played a game. So by the time he suits up once again, we're talking 10, 11 months since he last played a game. How does he look in his return to the court? How do Mackenzie Mgbako and Kel'el Ware adapt? One of them, a freshman coming in, and there's always kind of a learning curve there when it comes to freshmen and playing, especially in a conference in the Big Ten. The other, Kel'el Ware, is a player who struggled last season, certainly comes in with some high expectations this season, even with those struggles. How does he adapt to a Big Ten that is a lot different than the Pac-12, we'll say, and hopefully he has a bigger role this season as well because he has larger output. So how does all that factor in? Malik Renew, someone that we haven't talked a ton about this offseason. He has an increased role this year. He is going to be someone that he's, I think, going to have more space to operate in than he did last year. He showed flashes throughout the year last year, but there were still moments that he struggled. How does that look this season? Can he put those struggles behind him? Can he turn those flashes into more consistent stretches? Those are all kind of questions I have. Now, the strengths of this lineup. Versatility, I think, is a big one of them. You have a lot of guys that can play in multiple ways. Mackenzie Mgbako can play inside, play outside, I think is a 3-level scorer. Indiana didn't have that last season. Tamar Bates could have been that. He was a 3-level shot taker. He wasn't a 3-level shot maker, I don't think. That's kind of the closest Indiana had last season, and there haven't been in recent years players who have been kind of a 3-level scorer for Indiana. Jalen Hood-Schifino was also close. He wasn't someone that finished at the rim well or even got to the rim much, so I don't know how much that applies also. Spacing is going to be the big thing with this lineup, which is what Mike Woodson wanted. Xavier, Galloway, Mgbako, and Kel'el Ware all are going to operate on the perimeter, either like exclusively, predominantly, largely, but they're all guys who are going to operate on the perimeter. You're giving Malik Renew a lot of space to work. He did not have that last season, hardly at all. I think that's encouraging. He certainly has a bag of tricks and a really deep bag in the post. If you give him some space to try to beat his guy one-on-one, I think that's going to go well for Indiana, but it's also going to open up driving lanes for Xavier Johnson, for Trey Galloway, scoring opportunities for Mackenzie Mgbako, and opportunities for Kel'el Ware, who is a fascinating, unique type of player that his ability to score at multiple levels is going to cause problems for defenses. So how all that meshes together is something I'm really interested to see. Ultimately, though, this is a more modern lineup, and that's one of the takeaways everydayers will remember I had right after the loss to Miami, is that IU needed to get more modern. Their offense needed to be more modern. Their roster needed to be more modern. They needed to act like it was 2023. They've done that. This offense looks, on paper, a lot more modern, and I'm excited to see what that looks like. I love Trace Jackson Davis. I will forever be a huge fan of his. I recently purchased that to show you that I'm not just lying, that I really do like Trace, but that was not a modern offense Indiana ran last season. It's going to be interesting to see IU play a little bit more up tempo, a little more on the perimeter, and what that leads to with the Hoosiers. So I'm excited to see that. Now, that was a bit of a cop-out answer. There are other lineups I'm interested in seeing. I want to talk about two other ones here in just a moment. So there are two other lineups. Realistically, as I started looking at this, and this can be something we discuss later on, IU isn't crazy deep this year. And part of that is they have an open scholarship spot. They have one of their scholarship players in Jakai Newton that has a big question mark about how much he's going to be available this season. It led to a lot, like there's a lot of the same players in these lineups. There's only so many guard variations you can put out there. So the guards are the same in a lot of these. One of the lineups I'm interested to see is kind of an athleticism / energy lineup that is, I think the idea I have is a lineup that just kind of overwhelms you with speed, athleticism, energy. They work hard. They might have flaws, but they kind of make up for that with effort. I think it would look something like Gabe Cupps, Trey Galloway, Caleb Banks, Anthony Walker, and Payton Sparks. Now, I don't know how much this lineup sees the floor, but I think it's a lineup that could provide that type of spark, because you have a lot of guys out there who are going to play hard. They're going to play fast. They're going to be athletic, and that seems to be what IU wants. Gabe Cupps is someone I'm really excited to see. He's kind of flown under the radar a little bit, now, especially now that Mgbako is kind of the star freshman coming in. Gabe Cupps, I think, is going to be really good, really reliable right away for the Hoosiers. I'm excited to see him and what he can do for this team as the backup point guard. You could throw a CJ Gunn in here and make it an all-bench lineup. Trey Galloway is also someone that is athletic and plays with a ton of energy, and that's kind of why I stuck with him. Caleb Banks is someone I think this new offense really benefits, so I'm excited to see him play with more room, more space to show his athleticism and his ability to get to the rim. Same with Anthony Walker, maybe not someone who can knock down threes very much, but certainly can fly around the court and get to the rim. And then you have Payton Sparks, who his whole MO is kind of the effort, the energy, being that spark plug off the bench. He did it as a starter last year. It's going to be a little bit of an adaptation for him to come off the bench. But this really isn't a lineup that IU had last year. There wasn't a lineup where they could throw a couple guys off the bench out there and overwhelm teams with kind of athleticism. If Jakai Newton was healthy, he would be perfect for that shooting guard spot, and you would have 5 bench guys. But I think Jakai is an absolutely glove fit when it comes to this lineup if he's healthy. The strengths of this, the speed that they could play with, they could get up and down the court quickly if they can get defensive stops. They would have athleticism. They would lack shooting, but if you're able to force stops, force turnovers, miss shots, you can get out and run, and I think that's where the athleticism would show if they can get out and run. And you just generally have a high energy level. No, this is a group of guys who would make defenses work and be kind of pests when it comes to defense and offensively, working on the offensive glass, getting to the rim, forcing teams into foul trouble just by their ability to break guys down and get to the rim and draw fouls. I think there's a lot of intriguing aspects to this lineup. The other one is kind of the opposite in some ways to that. I think that lineup would be fun. I would lack a lot of shooting. That would be, I don't know that you could play that lineup every game. And I don't know that you could play it long in many minutes during any game. The opposite to that is a lineup based on spacing. Again, Indiana doesn't have a lot of depth in the backcourt. I think if you went with Xavier Johnson, I flirted with the idea of Gabe Cupps. I think Cupps could come in and be a solid three-point shooter. Him or Galloway, ended up going with Galloway. CJ Gunn, in theory, he kind of came in with the reputation of being a shooter. He struggled mightily in that regard last season. In theory, he could be that guy, and if things work out, he is that guy that can space the floor this season. You have Mgbako playing the 4, which I think ultimately may end up being his best position, the best place to use him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he closes a lot of games playing the 4. And then I have Kel'el Ware in there because he's a 5 that can space the floor. There is no kind of caveat with this lineup. With the starting lineup, you have 4 guys who can space the floor and 1 big man that can use that space, but maybe cuts off some driving lanes for guys. There is no asterisks on this lineup. This is 5 guys who can play on the perimeter, who, if you can drive and kick, can break guys down or knock down three-pointers. Absolutely a lineup IU did not have last season. They didn't have anything close to multiple guys who could be threats from the three-point line. And they didn't have a 5-man grouping that could play on the perimeter. They kind of came close somewhat when Trace Jackson-Davis wasn't playing before the holidays, and you had Race Thompson as a center and Miller Kopp as a 4. But that was kind of out of necessity more than anything else. And they never really had that when everybody was healthy. The strengths, this lineup has a ton of spacing. Whether that it shows itself in three-point shooting or spreading the floor out so a guy can beat someone off the dribble, get to the rim, and finish, this lineup would have a ton of spacing. They would have scoring at multiple levels. Xavier Johnson, great at getting to the rim and finishing. Mackenzie and Mgbako, a solid mid-level scorer that I think could become a really good three-point scorer. Xavier, Gunn, Mgbako, Ware, all guys, and Galloway, all guys who could be good three-point shooters. Maybe not on high volume, and that would certainly be something to monitor, but I could see this being a lineup Indiana uses often. And if the three-point shots are falling, it could be one of their best lineups. I also think you have ball handling at multiple positions at this lineup. Xavier, Trey Galloway, both guys who can break their defender down. And Mgbako, someone that can create for himself. And against the right opponent, Kel'el Ware is going to have that kind of advantage as well. So you have multiple guys where you can potentially find mismatches, go to them, and have them kind of create offense for you. Again, there wasn't a lineup like this Indiana had last season, which makes me excited for it this season. Let me know what lineups you guys are excited for. I only went with 3. If you guys have more, let me know. There were others I considered. An all-defense lineup, a bigger lineup. Mackenzie and Mgbako is a 3 with maybe some other bigs as well. Let me know what you guys think, either in the comments below, over on Twitter at @LO_Hoosiers, or in a review on iTunes. As always, though, guys, thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. We're going to do this for the women's basketball team. So be sure you're subscribed wherever you listen to podcasts at. Leave that quick rating and review. It helps us out more than you can know. But as always, guys, hope you all have a great Thursday. And most importantly, LEO.